welcome to the show. Before we begin, can you kind of introduce yourself to the listener just so they get a little bit more of a background about you?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Eugene. I'm Dave Chapman, and I am a organic vegetable farmer from Vermont. I grow tomatoes in a greenhouse, really good tasting tomatoes, and we're certified organic. And I now have to um, add to that to tell people that we actually grow them in the soil because right now in the National Organic Program, a lot of the tomatoes, most of the tomatoes on the wholesale market actually are grown hydroponically. So I've been doing this a long time. I can't quite remember, maybe 39 years, 40 years, something like that. And we started out as a very mixed vegetable farm. My first equipment was literally a team of oxen, and so I've sort of gone through the evolution of human history. Now we're a pretty high tech glass greenhouse, about 2.5 acres, and and we grow tomatoes in that greenhouse. So I'm also the executive director of something called the Real Organic Project, which we can talk about. And Real Organic is an effort to, um, I would say, reclaim the original true meaning of the word organic. And I think National Organic Program has been failing us more and more as market pressures come in to as there's been so much demand from people to be able to buy organic food, there's been a large response from corporations and industry to provide it. But with that has come the curse of watering down the standards and changing the meaning. So I'm part of a farmers movement, and not just farmers, eaters, but I think that this movement, we can say, is farmer led to return organic to where it began. Not that we haven't learned. We've learned a lot in the last 30 years, but the basic meaning of organic remains the same, which is feed the soil, not the plant. So instead of providing a bunch of soluble fertilizers to make a plant get big, we try to feed the microbiology in the soil, and many, many positive things happen for all the creatures further down the food chain as a result.
Yeah, I guess one of the bigger topics I wanted to cover with you today, as kind of like a health professional, a lot of times it's a little bit tough to convince people that converting to at least like supermarket level organic is that much better than like the conventionally factory farmed alternative that they'll find. So because a lot of times also people don't think it's worth it, and they have kind of like mental, and even the people that do think it's worth it, they kind of buy it, but then they have a kind of like a mental image of what organic is in their mind's eye, and that could actually be dramatically different from like the USDA or organics legal definition of what organic is. So can you kind of go into a little bit of detail in terms of, let's just start with like vegetables and fruits, like what the USDA organic seal does guarantee and what it doesn't guarantee? So that
Sure,
way people
sure,
know exactly kind of like the background of what they're buying, and they'll see.
sure. So let me just start by saying that I personally will always um, buy certified organic in a store. Um, so I'm going to say a lot of things that are critical of the National Organic Program, but I want to qualify those by saying I'm an organic farmer who believes in organic, and if I can know my farmer, that's the best. It's always best if you can know who you're buying it from. Even better if you can grow it yourself. But for most people in America, they don't know their farmer and they can't grow it themselves, or they choose not to. And so, and even for organic farmers, we still have to go to the store and buy a lot of the food. I don't know anybody who grows all their food. I grow all my tomatoes, but I don't grow my eggs. I don't grow my yogurt. I don't grow my beans. That, you know, there's lots of food. I don't grow the grain that makes the bread I eat. So for those things, I do my very best to buy organic, and I think that's very important. We all go to the organic label for a reason, because we want high quality food, and I'm gonna present a more sophisticated understanding of organic than many people have. I think many people choose organic because they don't want poisons on their food. They don't want pesticides. They don't want food where the ground has been sprayed with glyphosate, with Roundup. And those are important things, and I respect them, and I share those same desires. But real organic goes beyond mere lack of pesticides, and it tries to address the nutritional integrity of the food, both the um, density of the food, how much of some certain nutrients are in it, and also the diversity, the nutritional diversity. So there are a lot of substances in food that's grown right. There are a lot of substances in food that isn't grown right, but there are a lot more in food that is grown right. And I think we have co-evolved with plants and the life in the soil. We're part of that system. And it is, we are naturally made healthy by food that's grown in a good, healthy soil system. We don't have to be brilliant to figure out how to do that. We mostly have to get out of the way and encourage those natural processes to happen. So most of the farmers who are certified organic in the US are real organic, and we should respect them, we should honor them, we should support them. We have to also acknowledge, and this is I think a painful public conversation, that not necessarily all the food that's being certified as organic and sold would be what I would call real organic. And we can talk about the different categories and what those failures are. And, you know, so we're left with a kind of a Sophie's choice kind of dilemma here, which is that if people like me speak up about it, people like me who know a lot about this, we're going to undermine public faith in the organic label. And if people like me don't speak up about it, then this erosion of integrity is going to continue unchecked. So we have a tough choice. Do we do it or don't we do it? And, you know, if Soren Kierkegaard said that we all have choices of do it or don't do it. He said, if you don't do it, he said, if you do it, you're going to face a lot of confusion for a while about the unexpected consequences. But if you don't do it, you're going to lose your soul. You're going to lose something so precious. So I say we need to do it. We need to take on a hard conversation. And I'm not, you know, the Real Organic Project is promoting a new label in the sense it's called the Real Organic Project label. And we are using that to help farmers and eaters who care find each other. But I'm certainly not saying that anybody who doesn't have that label isn't really organic, right? And I also will say that ultimately, if we succeed, probably our label will get taken over too. That is the nature of capitalism. It's very hard to keep the sharks from, you know, swimming in with the blood is, and the blood is money. That's why it's more important in the Real Organic Project that our real goal is education. Our real goal is to have people become more informed and be able to demand the food that they want, and not be so easily misled by marketing slogans. Okay, so that's a little background. Now to go to your first question about fruits and vegetables. You go into the store, can you trust the organic label? It depends. If you're buying berries or tomatoes or peppers or greens, then you have to be suspicious because a lot of those right now are grown hydroponically. Hydroponic production means that the nutrition for the plant is supplied as a liquid feed. You find some way to make the nutrition plant available, easily available, and you put it on pretty much every time that you would irrigate. Sometimes the plants actually grow with their roots in a trough of water. Sometimes you see in the new vertical farms where they actually just spray the roots, they're hanging in air, or in hydroponic berries, blueberries, strawberries, hydroponic tomatoes, peppers. They'll grow them in a container with a bunch of coconut husks. And the coconut husks have no nutrition. And maybe they'll even throw in a handful of compost, which is a nice idea, but it still has nowhere near the nutrition to supply that plant in that little container. And so the plant is fed by liquid feeding. And that's what hydroponic production is. That's what hydroponic means. Um, it's a relatively new thing that this is being allowed on any scale by the USDA in organic certification. Right now, it's happening on a massive scale. Driscoll's is doing this on a big scale. Companies like Wholesome Harvest are doing it on a big scale for tomatoes, and starting in on berries. Driscoll's, of course, is all berries. So if you're buying those products, then you probably need to do some research to figure out, if you care, to figure out whether these are hydroponic or not. Unfortunately, writing these companies, they will not tell you the truth about this. If you ask, do you grow anything hydroponically, they'll just say no. And it's a sort of a dismaying thing. And we're going to have to protect ourselves. This is why we're creating a new label. But in the meantime, I would be cautious about those. One of the things that I say is just ask the people in the store, are these tomatoes hydroponic? Are these berries hydroponic? And by and large, they won't know. And mostly they won't even know what the question means. But if enough of us ask, they're certainly going to find out. And that's the goal. Let's be informed. Let's be transparent about what it is that we're putting in our body. I think that those foods are nutritionally inferior. They've compared just conventional hydroponic to just conventional field growing. They do very well in the major nutrients because, of course, that's what they're adding. And hydroponic production is very efficient in terms of human labor, in terms of yield per square foot. But as Vandana Shiva would say, it's not very efficient in terms of health per square foot. It's not very efficient in terms of how many phytonutrients are you getting when you eat that food. If you'd like, I could talk a little bit about the Dorito Effect, which was a great book by a man named Mark Schatzker. I got to hear Mark speak and got a chance to have a dinner with him this summer. And he's a brilliant writer, very good book. And he looks at why is America so obese right now? How did we develop such a massive problem with weight control? And he comes up with the premise that he goes back to the invention of the Dorito. And he says this was at a critical time where the flavor industry was just really getting started. And before that, the flavor industry was adding spices. And just at the time they were developing the Dorito, they figured out how to make flavors. And they could do this completely synthetically, make it out of oil, or they could do it by twisting around natural flavors. So instead of starting with oil, they'd start with pine bark or something. And they end up with something that tastes like whatever you want. Strawberries, bananas, vanilla, anything you want, they can do. They're very good at the flavor industry now. And it's a big industry. They sell a lot of flavorings to disguise what we're eating. And as they do that, our bodies become very confused because I think that, again, we've evolved for our tongues to be able to tell us what we should be eating. And with flavorings, it's easy to trick our tongue, which is our main way of testing food. Not just our tongue, also our ability to smell, and there are all these smell receptors inside, the throat. And this is how we decide if food tastes good or not, and we get cravings. And the development of the flavor industry is coupled with the gradual but steady reduction of the nutritional density and the nutritional diversity of basic foodstuffs over the last 80 years. USDA has been testing this. They've done the same thing with the government in England, same results, which is as a result of modern agriculture, all of our basic foodstuffs are less nutritious than they were. So if you eat an apple now and you ate an apple from 80 years ago, chances are the apple now is significantly less rich in nutrition. And so you have to eat 2 apples or 3 apples to get the same amount of certain vitamins or minerals. And in some cases, doesn't matter how many apples you eat, you're not going to get what you got 80 years ago. This is true of most basic foodstuffs. So Mark Schatzker is putting this together and saying, because food is less nutritious and as a result, it doesn't taste as good, and because they've developed ways of making it taste good again, we can no longer tell what's nutritious and what isn't. We even forget what nutritious food tastes like. And so we have to be more and more sophisticated in what we buy, what we eat, what kind of agriculture we support, that these have great effects on, of course, it has great effects on obesity, because if you have a craving for some nutrient that you're not getting, you're going to keep eating until you try and get enough of it. And we're kind of looking for love in all the wrong places. So it's at the place where it's hard to trust our own body to make good choices, to have nutritional wisdom. But it's his premise that all animals used to have nutritional wisdom. It's just that we're facing a very deceptive food industry and a very broken agricultural industry where we farm really focused on profit rather than nutrition.
Well, Dave, regarding the deception, kind of rewinding back a little bit, you said one thing a person could try to do if they want to determine whether their, let's say, like bell pepper was grown in the soil or whether it was grown hydroponically, is contact the company that's producing them, but then the company will kind of say no. Is there a way to ask them that you know of that will require them to disclose the honest business practice? Because if they don't, they might be like legally liable for not answering that correctly or something like that.
Yeah, Eugene, I know it's such a dismaying situation. The way they get around that, a company like Driscoll's, is they've invented a new definition for the word hydroponic. And so what they would say if you wrote them and asked them, and a number of people have, and they sent me their letters, is they'll say, well, no, we don't grow anything hydroponically. And now, because they have caught a lot of flack for it, they'll say, well, we do grow some food in containers. We do grow some berries in containers, but it's not hydroponic. Well, what they've done is redefine the word hydroponic, and it's a shameful marketing trick, and there's nothing new about it. It happens all the time. This is the food industry that we're up against. And I don't know what to do about that, for all of us, except to get together and be talking and say, well, I don't think you can trust this company, but I think you can trust that company. And, the first stop for me would be the farmer's market. And the second stop would be a co-op. And the third stop would be, I'm not ruling out all supermarket chains. I would go to a chain that I trusted, and I would talk to the people in the produce department and see what they say. And in my experience, they actually don't know the answer. I think I told you, I went to a Whole Foods in West Hollywood when I was visiting my daughter out there 4 or 5 years ago. And I asked the guy it was beautiful, beautiful produce department, this little Whole Foods, and most of the produce was local. It was grown within 60 miles of LA. And they just had an amazing selection. They had pictures of all the farmers up on the walls. I thought, this is incredible. This is great. You know, wonderful that they have a choice of so much locally grown organic food here in one of the biggest cities in America. And but I saw this beautiful display of tomatoes, organic, certified organic, whole trade, and I asked the guy. I said, "Excuse me, but are these hydroponic?" And he said, "I don't know." And he said, "Okay." And we talked about other things. And then at the end of conversation, I was getting ready to leave, and he said, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." "What's that?" And he said, "What was that you asked me about in the beginning?" I said, "About whether they were hydroponic." He said, "Yeah, what does that mean?" And so I explained it means that they weren't grown in soil and they got all their nutrition from a liquid feed that was processed in some factory somewhere. And he said, "Well, that's not right." I said, "Well, no, I don't think it is right." And he said, "Can they do that?" I said, "Yeah, right now USDA allows them to do that." He said, "Well, it's not right." He said, "I've never seen any labeling on the box." I said, "No, they don't have to label it." That's not right. I'm starting to love this guy, you know. And I actually already really did like him because I could see that he cared about his customers, he cared about the produce, and he was ignorant of what was going on. It's not that, you know, all the people in all these institutions are evil. Mostly they're just ignorant. They don't understand what's going on. And that's where we need to become more informed. We need to listen to people like you, listen to your podcast, you know, listen to people like Jim Riddle. I know he was one of your
Hmm.
guests, and try to understand, well, how's our food being grown? And, you know, how's the system getting twisted around? And what's the kind of agriculture that we want to support? And, you know, that for me is a big question because it's very important how we choose to spend our money and what we choose to actually eat.
So if I contact like Drisdale or that company you mentioned, and I basically asked them like, do you grow your crops in soil? Like surely they can't answer yes we do, right?
Good question. I don't know. I hope you try it. I think what they'll say is mostly we grow in the soil, but we do grow some in containers.
I see. So like a
If you,
customer, yeah, I mean if a customer hears that, I think it's safe to presume that, okay, then I just won't buy from this company just to be safe that it's not hydroponics. Is it right to say
yes,
that?
yeah, that is right, Eugene. But again, we're dealing with not just a company or a few companies, but with a food system. So, so when I went to that Whole Foods, they weren't labeled Wholesome Harvest; they were labeled Whole Trade. And I actually was in a meeting the next day with the head grower at Wholesome, and I asked, "Were those your tomatoes?" And he said, "Yeah, probably." And you know, but they were sold under the Whole Foods brand.
Hmm.
And uh, Driscoll berries. Here's a good example. So Driscoll's is the biggest conventional berry vendor in the world, and they are also the biggest organic berry vendor in the world. And they sell a lot in the US, but they also sell a lot in Europe and they sell a lot in Canada. And they grow in all five continents and they ship it into the first world and give us this amazing year round supply of beautiful, high quality fruit that isn't rotten. And they do an excellent job. I have a lot of respect for Driscoll's ability to manage their supply chain. And they're doing an amazingly complex task. I don't have a lot of respect for their labor practices. There's been a boycott of them for their labor practices for some years now. We're trying to get them up. You know, in California, I know that farmers are working on $15 an hour. Uh, they're working on $15 a day in Mexico for the Driscoll's workers. So our cheap food comes at a high cost for somebody. And, you know, that's a whole other issue. It's not about nutrition, but it is about the food system. But what happens, and this is very real, is that I have been to stores like Whole Foods in the Boston area in the height of the outdoor strawberry season, and the only organic strawberry in the store is from Driscoll's, from somewhere in the world, certainly not from New England. And that's because Driscoll's has an agreement. And again, I'm not picking on Driscoll's. This is how it works. Driscoll's has an agreement with the wholesaler that if they want to carry Driscoll's berries, they're going to basically be exclusive. And so a local producer is not allowed to sell into the store. They're not welcome on the shelves. Certain stores are challenging this by having really vibrant local sections. And that Whole Foods in West LA that I visited was like that. They had a tremendous amount of local stuff. But I'm just saying this is a real issue where it goes even beyond your personal choice or mine about what food we're even allowed to choose from. And what's happening with this USDA redefinition of organic is we're losing our choices. The soil-grown blueberries and strawberries and tomatoes and lettuce are no longer going to be available on the shelves. And we won't know that. All that we know is it's wonderful. We've always got X brand available, and hey, it's pretty good, and I'm pleased to support organic. And probably it is unsprayed. So, okay, you know, that's better than sprayed, and I support that, but it is not what I want when I buy organic. And as a result, I only buy berries from people I know because I just don't trust them anymore.
Well, regarding the inputs for hydroponics operations, they don't use like synthetic fertilizer for in general, right?
Right, Eugene, but no, so here, this is an important thing. They only use fertilizers that are allowed on the national list. So the USDA has a big list of things that they say are allowed for organic. And you're right, no synthetics are allowed as fertilizers. But let's go back for a minute to the Dorito effect and Mark Schatzker's description of natural flavoring and artificial flavoring. And he would say that essentially there is no difference. They're both artificial flavoring. It's just that the natural flavoring that is in that yogurt that makes it taste like strawberries, even though there's nothing distantly related to a strawberry in that yogurt, is it was derived from pine bark or something. Highly processed and designed to confuse and fool your body and your tongue. The same is true for these natural fertilizers. There's nothing natural about hydrolyzed soy protein. It's been processed in tree. If you're not careful, when you put it down, you'll burn the roots off your plant. It acts just like a chemical nitrogen fertilizer, in my opinion. And not just my opinion. I've talked to soil scientists who say, yeah, that's hot. So basically, they figured out how to game the system. They figured out how to make a hydroponic solution out of natural substances in their base. That hydrolyzed soy protein has very little to do with soy meal. And, you know, it's a focused plant available fertilizer, and it does all the things that you don't want a chemical fertilizer to do, in my opinion. So the whole idea of organic farming is that you get this natural, gradual release from the soil of these nutrients and these antioxidants and these vitamins. And it comes from organic matter basically decaying and being digested by microorganisms, by fungi, by bacteria, by microarthropods, by, you know, little animals, big animals. And the outcome of that gradual digestion process of everybody's eating everybody else is this superb diet that has been accurately filtered. Like mycorrhizal fungi will go out and mine the mineral aspects, parts of the soil, in order to provide that feed to the plant. In exchange for giving the plant those minerals, the mycorrhizal fungi will take sugars that are a product of photosynthesis So the energy for the whole system is still the sun, and the processor of the energy is still the plant. It's a beautiful system. So the plant takes the solar energy and turns it into sugars, and it uses about 2/3 of those byproducts for itself to build its body and its fruit. And it takes about 1/3 and exudes those photosynthates out of the roots to feed all this incredibly teeming city of microbes living right in the root zone. And then those microbes will reach out far, far from the roots to get the nutrition that the plant needs for health. And there's an intelligence to it. They're not just randomly getting, okay, aluminum. They're getting the amount of aluminum that the plant needs that is healthy for the plant. So they act like a gut. They're digesting those nutrients in the soil and creating a balanced diet for the plant. If there's too much aluminum in the soil, they'll leave it and just get enough for the plant. If there's not enough, they're going to figure out how to scavenge a little extra. So it's a brilliant system. We didn't invent it. We barely understand it, but we can certainly appreciate it. And it is the foundation of organic farming. It is what organic farming is based on. Organic farmers say we don't grow crops. We're all livestock farmers, and our livestock are the billions of microbes that live in the ground. There's far more life under the ground than there is above. So when you take a hydroponic system, you've completely bypassed all of that brilliant intelligence of coevolution. And you've gone into a factory and you said, okay, we're going to give them this much nitrogen, this much phosphorus, and this much potassium. And we know how much to give them in order to grow a big plant quickly. We know how to grow a lot of calories per acre. We don't really understand the nutritional stuff, but we're not getting paid for it anyway. So that's not what we're about. And I say this as if hydroponic producers are cynical and mean-spirited, and they aren't. I have friends, good friends, who are large-scale hydroponic producers, not certified organic, although I know some of them too. They're not bad people, and they're not trying to poison anybody, but they have a very different belief system than I do about nutrition and about agriculture. And until fairly recently, they were doing what they were doing, and they kind of laughed and rolled their eyes about us organic wackos. And now they're going, hey, there's money to be made, and I'm now allowed into the party doing what I do. All I have to do is change what fertilizers I put in my tank. And I'm sorry, but that's not organic farming. So, I can respect their intelligence. I can respect their integrity. I do not respect the wisdom of what they're choosing to do. And I certainly don't respect the integrity of calling it organic, because it isn't.
Are there like pesticides also used in hydroponics? I don't know if there are like any like insect infestations in hydroponics. I don't know too much about that.
Yeah, sure. So some hydroponic operations say they have no insects, and all we can say is they must still be startups, because nature abhors a vacuum, and insects will find their way into growing plants. And there are two ideas behind an organic system. One is that if the plant is growing in balance, it's not going to be very attractive to insects that want to eat it. And Elliot Coleman described this as that insects are sort of like vultures or jackals picking off the weak of the tribe. And, so if a plant is very attractive to insects, it's because it's diseased. It's because it's got a nutritional deficiency, or it's been severely challenged by climate, something like that. The other thing that organic growers will do is also try to keep, and this is true of all organic growers, not just soil growers, they will try to bring in beneficial insects, say to a greenhouse setup. And they create a balance. It's not as good as the balance that's created outside, but if you're growing in a greenhouse, then you can still do a pretty good job bringing in beneficial insects. Do large scale hydroponic producers use insecticides? In my experience, which is pretty broad, yes, they do. When I was on the USDA task force studying this, 2/3 of the producers were hydroponic and 1/3 were soil growers. We toured hydroponic operations, and they did use pesticides. They used allowed pesticides. They used um, naturally derived pesticides, but they were using pesticides. In fact, we went to a lettuce place that was 5 acres of hydroponic, and they had a fairly regular spray program, and it was their way of controlling insects.
And can you kind of go a little bit more into detail? Because I know sometimes like people will say like, oh, organic farmers use pesticides too, but can you go a little bit more into details of like the pesticides that organic farmers use or that's allowed by the USDA organic program, and then the synthetic pesticides that like conventional farmers use, and kind of how that affects health, you know, how long it's persistent in the crop or things of that nature.
Yeah. Um, Pesticides are used to varying degrees by organic growers. There certainly are organic growers who don't use any pesticides, um, just never spray. And there are other ones. I've been told that in the California baby greens fields, they spray very regularly, quite a lot. Um, they're using allowed pesticides, but maybe quite a few of them. So, and what I would say is perhaps we need to talk about shallow organic versus deep. And in deep organic, you've got enough balance in the system, and that's what an organic system is meant to be, is an um, incredibly diverse system. So nothing ever gets to take over. It's like a city, and you don't have one gang take over, because there's a lot of gangs and there's a lot of cops and there's a lot going on. Everything's always changing around, and in a good system, a good soil system, there's an incredible amount of diverse life living in that soil. When things get out of balance, it means that one insect has, or one disease has gone berserk and run rampant. Does that make sense?
And do you like with organic produce at the supermarket, to come back to like biodiversity in the soil? Are most of them just coming from like monocrop operations, even if they are like certified organic?
There's no doubt that the bigger the farm, the more likely it is that you're dealing with a monocrop situation. So, uh, the sort of example I give of just the dream organic farm would be Elliot Coleman's farm in Maine. And you've got a lot of diversity. It's a small, very intensive market garden. And, the opposite extreme would be Earthbound or Grimway in California, where you've got huge fields of one crop. And I'm not saying that you can't do a good job in a huge field, but I will say that things are more likely to go wrong when you've got a large corporation instead of a small family farm. It will go wrong in a biological sense, not in an economic sense. So, we've got different kinds of wisdom here, different kinds of judging mechanisms, and we get pushed into these large farms, or I think we push farms into becoming large through a somewhat flawed economic system. And the thing about a large farm is that they can become very efficient, but if high level of efficiency is not necessarily what we want. We want a system that is redundant, that is flexible, that is resilient. And a resilient system isn't going to be designed for maximum productivity per acre. The problem with those systems that are totally focused on efficiency is they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable to everything. They're vulnerable to disease, they're vulnerable to insects, and the solution to those almost inevitably becomes, let's spray more biocides, whether they're allowed biocides or not. It's a fragile ecosystem, and nature doesn't like fragile ecosystems. So, she's going to try and change things up. They're also vulnerable to labor disruption. They're vulnerable to terrorist attack. They're vulnerable to transportation problems. The fact that I heard Michael Pollan saying that we've got a situation. Actually, he was quoting Herman Kahn, I think, where we're exporting a kind of sugar cookie to Sweden, and we're also importing a very similar cookie from Sweden. And he said, "This is a little crazy. We should just change recipes." There's no sanity to shipping cookies to Sweden and importing cookies from Sweden. So it's a crazy world we live in. It's not going to be a simple answer, but yeah, I feel like I wandered off there a minute. I think that your question was,
Like
how do
basically,
we?
yeah, basically whether for instance, the pesticides used in organic farming could be as dangerous as just the synthetic pesticides used in conventional farming. That's one of the.
The research that I've seen shows that the pesticide footprint on the food is much less just in the organic that you buy in the store, and I believe that. And there have been interesting tests where they switch people to an organic diet as just bought in the store, and then a conventional diet, and they can see real differences in the pesticide levels in the blood, in the body. So I think that, again, I always choose to buy organic. I'm not suggesting that we should turn our backs on that. Where else are we going to turn? I think we need to, I like to say, we are not arsonists. We are firefighters. Don't blame us because the house is on fire. So we're trying to put out a fire. We're not saying organic is meaningless. We're saying things are being allowed in that aren't organic, and we should stop that fraud from happening.
Well, you also kind of talked about hydroponics being nutritionally inferior to crops grown in the soil. Are there any kind of like studies on PubMed.gov or any studies that you know of that definitely prove that, the micronutrient profile of a hydroponically grown bell pepper or tomato is inferior to that of like a tomato grown in the soil?
Right. Yes, I do have a study. It's called Tasting It. And it's a pretty good metric. And I think you will consistently find that the tomatoes from my farm taste significantly better than the hydroponic tomatoes from Mexico. I get this feedback all the time, and it's the feedback I get from my own body. And I think that's a trustworthy metric. In terms of reliable research, I haven't seen it yet. You have to understand that hydroponic organic is a very new invention. Yes, there's been a tiny amount of it happening in California and a few places for years. Tiny. We're talking about, little hoop house with some fish tanks and some basil. But happening on scale now, and right now we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of sales a year. The industry themselves, the hydro-organic industry, claims their sales are at $1 billion. I don't know about that, but certainly hundreds of millions, probably $500 million at least. So this is happening on a pretty big scale. And yet it's all new. And in fact, it's so mysterious that even the producers won't admit it. So they've walked into a gold mine. Your dollars, my dollars. This is a gold mine for them. So I don't know of good research. No, sorry.
Yeah, and I guess I think like these days also, like science has become like the new like dad and mom for most adults. Like when people don't know the answer, they kind of like, oh, show me the science. But it's also important for people to remember that science is flawed as well. So like technology is constantly improving, so the way we measure things and like objectively interpret things is constantly like getting better and better as well. And it's kind of also important to remember that, you know, the Earth has gone through like 4.5 billion years of very complicated evolution, and to think like someone can kind of replicate like some kind of soil system as efficiently is kind of like a little bit foolish in my opinion. Although I'm a believer in technology, but I feel it's like very limited as well. So I think it's kind of like, I guess, important for the listener to understand that as well.
Yeah, I will just say I'm not a Luddite. I embrace technology that seems to me to be helpful to moving us where we need to go. But obviously, right now, our technology is in danger of literally destroying us. So um, I'm not planning to go back to a cave if I can help it. But the question is, how do we use technology for the common good? And in terms of science, no matter which side of this conversation you're on, um, everyone's going to claim science is on their side. So I can't tell you how often I heard in the debates with the National Organic Standards Board when this issue was being argued, and we were up against professional lobbyists who are very good at their job. And what they would say, their mantra was, we need to follow the science. Well, in my conversations with soil scientists, there was pretty much universal acclaim. They said it's amazing the degree to which Sir Albert Howard and Eve Balfour, back 80 years ago, got it right. These founders of the modern organic movement had these observations of cause and effect, and they didn't necessarily have an articulate description of the actual biological processes by which it happened, but they could see the cause and effect. And since then, virtually all of soil science and nutrition has supported their observations. So we've got lots of science on our side, and science is exploding. So the whole discovery of the human microbiome and its relationship with the soil microbiome is just beginning. Stuart Hill, a famous soil zoologist, once said to me, what we know is like a little dot, and what we don't know is like a huge ball. And we need to have enough humility to appreciate the fact that we don't understand what we're mucking with, and we need to change things from how we've co-evolved very carefully and very conservatively, because we
Yeah.
really have no idea what the unintended consequences will be.
Yeah, and what I like to
You
tell
know,
people,
you
what I like to tell people all the time, and I think I've heard this from Paul Chek, is like every single drug that was once like that ended up killing people or producing serious side effects was at one point like scientifically proven to be like completely safe and fine.
right,
So that's kind of
right.
important to consider as well. Do you know?
Yeah, our
Do you know
understanding is a
like
work in progress.
Do you know, like, when they first started, like, implementing hydroponics, did they do, like, the safety testing for this in-house, or did the FDA kind of take over and test it for safety before kind of, like, allowing the production of, like, vegetables or fruit, for instance, from hydroponics operations?
So hydroponics has been really going as a world vegetable industry. I don't know, maybe for 40 years or so, and it really came out of Europe, came out of Holland, and one of my friends talked about when he was a kid working in a greenhouse, and they did their first section of the greenhouse as an experiment with hydroponics. And he said, yeah, we didn't think we'd keep it up because we didn't like the way the plants looked. But at the end of the year, they had outproduced the soil grown by 25%. He said that was the end of the conversation for a Dutchman. They were all hydroponic the next year. There was no government appraisal of the impact of nutrition. And if there had been, they wouldn't have discovered anything because their understanding of nutrition was pretty Stone Age at that point. But now it's a big industry. So when people talk about hydroponics like it's some new thing, it's not. You can go over to Holland and see many thousands of acres of glass greenhouses growing hydroponically. Calling it organic is the new thing, and in Holland, you can't. So most of those beautiful out-of-season peppers that we get in New England come from Holland. The organic, certified organic peppers, and they can only be certified organic in the United States. In Holland, if they can't sell them here, they have to sell them as conventional. They do not accept our definition. They will not allow hydroponic. Canada doesn't, according to the treaty with the US, will not accept hydroponically grown fruits or berries or vegetables to be sold into Canada, although they are. Who's keeping track of that? It's happening. But other countries, Mexico just rejected hydroponics as certified organic. So the US are like the pirates of the world here. And because we're looking for the short buck, not because we're looking to protect the integrity of what organic means. This is very, very much driven by industry.
So does the real organic project basically is an add-on to like the USDA organic certification, and it just indicates that the crop definitely isn't hydroponics, correct?
That's right. It also indicates that if it were a dairy product, that the cattle or the goats went out on pasture every day that the weather allowed. It also, because again, we haven't even talked about confinement operations and livestock, which is a nightmare. It's truly a nightmare. And right now, these large confinement operations are being certified as organic, even though it's clearly against the law, clearly against the rules. We're not mostly dealing with an issue of having a bad law. We have a good law. We're mostly dealing with bad enforcement of a good law. And the same is true for eggs. You go into a supermarket and buy certified organic eggs. I would say over 80% of the eggs that are certified organic would have been decertified if the animal welfare reform had been accepted by the USDA that was passed by every level leading up to final implementation. And everybody wanted it to be passed, except for the senators who represented those large CAFOs, except for the lobbyists from conventional livestock that didn't want the USDA even talking about animal welfare. And of course, except for those CAFO poultry producers themselves. As a result of that, though, you can't get a good organic egg in a store. I mean, that's just about a fact, and it's a dismal fact. I consider this to be such a naked tragedy. They've so suppressed the price that somebody who's growing chickens that go out into the grass every day can't compete. And one of the things that we have to accept if we want to have a sane, sustainable agriculture is that the food is going to cost more. And people don't like to say this, but I'll say it. It's going to cost more than the products of an industrial agriculture. And we have the cheapest food in the history of the world in America right now. And we also have the most expensive healthcare in the history of the world in America right now. And I think those two differing lines on the graph are quite related. So it's not that our food is cheaper, it's just that we pay for it in other places, right? We pay for it in farm workers who can't afford to eat and have to be on SNAP program on food stamps. We pay for it in exploding healthcare costs. We pay for it in cancer and unintended consequences of people who live in the watershed of these industrial farms. It's not that the farmers of the Midwest want to poison us, it's that the economic system pushes them to poison us. And if we want to change it, we got to change the system. And it starts with you and me talking, Eugene, and with the people that you share this with. And in the end, we've got to bring government with us. It's, we need, it's great that we're a you know, heroic band fighting for a better food system, but we need to change this as a national priority.
Well, you mentioned that like the organic standards are pretty solid, but just the enforcement isn't that great. I kind of checked out like some extensive like video footage on YouTube in terms of the step-by-step auditing program that goes on, like supposedly every year. And if these kind of steps are followed and there's that audit or that inspection once a year, like how are these, like for instance, factory farmed egg production facilities still being able to be certified organic? Because from what I saw, it was like pretty elaborate and pretty extensive. And I mean, if they're showing up once a year, even once a year, they'll be able to kind of like catch that they're typically a factory farmed operation and that there is no outdoor access, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how are they able to continue then and keep their certification?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, the people certifying them are not holding them accountable, and the USDA is not holding the people who certify them accountable. So, it's a flawed system, and I think that the only way that we change that is with tremendous public pressure. Michael Pollan once said, we don't have a food movement until we can light up the switchboards. And we need to be able to have such outrage that the USDA will, in fact, listen to us and respond. And you got to understand that we are up against an enormous financial juggernaut. Big Ag is very real. They spend more money lobbying Congress than the defense industry. I heard that from Congresswoman Shelley Pingree at a rally that we hosted. So, it would be naive of us to think that this is going to be easy. We can make responsible personal choices, but to change the system is going to be a fight, and it's going to be a fight against people who are making a great deal of money off of us. So I so much wish that the National Organic Program was out there, fighting to the mat to protect us, but I don't see it. I don't see it. So if we bring enough attention to this, they will change. And if we don't bring attention, they will not change, because there will be other people bringing attention. There are lobbyists who are bringing a great deal of attention to these decisions and these processes. And the poor person who runs a National Organic Program gets pressure from her boss and from her boss's boss, and it starts up at the Secretary of Agriculture, and it goes all the way down. This is the trickle down theory of I don't know what it would be called, of irresponsibility, of fraud. So we need to we need to make a ruckus. There was a story that just broke yesterday. I saw an article in Forbes about it, about a CAFO, that's a concentrated animal feeding operation, a confinement dairy in Texas, certified organic, called Natural Prairie Dairy. 25,000 cows, 4 facilities. No way that those animals go out to pasture every day. No way, right? And the question is, and they actually, some of the animal rights people got jobs there and went in wearing body cams and photographed them, some of the employees being quite abusive to the animals. But even when they're not hitting a cow with a shovel, just to look at the conditions and to look at these cows, the first thing that comes out of anybody's mouth is, that's not organic. That's not what I meant. I'm willing to pay extra for the milk. That's not the milk I want to buy. That's not the farm I want to support. And, the question isn't just how is it that this kind of cruelty was happening to animals. The question is, how is this able to be called organic in the first place? And where is the outrage? So, and just to say that the result of this kind of farm being certified, and I saw a story in USA Today that there are 6 organic CAFOs, large confinement dairies in Texas, and they produce 1.3 times the milk of the 450 certified organic dairy farms in Wisconsin. That's a staggering relationship. It gives you a sense of the scale of these large farms. And the Wisconsin farms aren't tiny. They're serious businesses, family farms, and they're doing, by and large, a very good job. And they're taking care of the land, and they're taking care of the animals, and they're producing the kind of milk people want to buy. And what happens when we permit these kind of CAFOs to be certified as organic against the rules, against the law? What happens when we permit that? And it's our government, so we have to say that we're complicit in allowing this to happen, is it puts out of business those 450 family farms. And this is happening on a massive scale right now. I think last year, 10% of the organic dairy farms in California, it was reported to me, went out of business. It's happening all over. It's happening in the Midwest. It's happening in the Northeast. We're losing our farms. Same thing's happening in berries. We're losing our farms. We're losing the real organic farms, and we're going to be left with an industrialized product that is not what we wanted to buy. It's not the farming we want to support. And I'm not ready to give up on the organic brand, the organic name. We started it. We should defend it. We should protect it. And we should. The only reason that this works is because people are unaware. If people were aware, hydroponic getting certified as organic ends tomorrow. If people were aware, CAFO's getting certified as organic ends tomorrow. There are about 35 million people who are regularly buying organic food in America. It wouldn't take 35 million people objecting to change this conversation. 1 million people saying hell no, and we've got a new ball game all of a sudden.
Yeah, what I try to tell like my clients in terms of like just meat at the supermarket in general is that even like USDA, even like free range USDA certified organic meat basically is just like a factory farm, but just with organic grains.
Exactly.
And that's like literally like the only difference, and that's it. And I kind of like asking your opinion on this one. I know sometimes it says like no antibiotics used, but then there's like a caveat to that where like it could still be used, although it says that if like a veterinarian approves of it in a certain situation. Do you know like the rule behind that?
My understanding, and I'm not a livestock guy, but my understanding is that if I had a sick cow, I call the vet and get some antibiotics for the cow, and I have to pull her out of her milk, out of organic production while she's being treated. And I think that's appropriate. I would use antibiotics for myself if I had a tick that looked like it was going to go to Lyme disease, or for my kids. I don't think that we should say that antibiotics should never be used as a drug to provide health. What we want to get away from is antibiotics being used as a prophylactic crutch for bad living conditions. You don't want to have to give your kids antibiotics because they are malnourished and living in the closet. So it's the widespread irresponsible use of antibiotics, in my opinion, that should be prohibited, and that's the way it is. In the EU, it's interesting. In the EU, hydroponics is prohibited, CAFOs are prohibited. Antibiotics in organic are not prohibited, but the animal welfare requirements are far stricter than in the US. So animals have much more space by law, and as long as people are following the law, then it makes sense. Okay, if an animal gets sick, you can use antibiotics, but not prophylactically.
I guess my only question regarding that is like, oh, like how likely is it for a farmer to comply with like, okay, let's say this cow got sick and then I'm applying antibiotics to this cow. Like, do they really take it out of the production while the cow is being treated with antibiotics, or do they just keep it there anyways? Because I don't know who's going to go check, That's like, I mean, realistically speaking. And it's like so much work to move this cow away into another area.
Yeah, they do it in Vermont. You know, when I got into this debate, and it is an international debate about what does organic mean, um, I was completely unaware of all these issues because I lived in Vermont, and the Vermont Organic Farmers Program, which inspects us, has great integrity, and the farmers who participate have great integrity. I don't mean that we're all saints, but I just mean people by and large believe in what we're doing. They believe in organic, and there's a culture in which people tend to tell the truth about this stuff. So I appreciate what you're saying, and I can't answer for other situations, but I can say in the world that I live in, I actually trust it. Yeah.
Gotcha. And do you see kind of like in your lifetime, do you see kind of like factory farming going away, or do you think it's like getting just bigger and bigger? Or is the organic movement growing? I kind of like have uh, like conflicting articles. Like one says it is growing, then a lot of other people say, oh, like many of them are going out of business.
Well, the organic brand is growing, so organic sales are growing for sure. You know, it continues to go up. The two that I saw that leveled off were organic milk and organic eggs. And I think that was a result of the exposés in the Washington Post showing that CAFOs had invaded both milk and eggs. I think at the current trajectory, um, if the Real Organic Project fails and does not become a big deal nationally, I think that industrial ag is going to take over the organic label. And my guess is that in 10 years, about the only way you'll get real organic will be at a farmer's market or a CSA or a roadside stand. If the Real Organic Project grows and is met with support by eaters and farmers, then I think it's possible that we can create a meaningful presence in stores as well as in more direct retail, which I would really like. I still go to the store, you know, in Vermont. We don't have very active CSAs or farmers markets in the winter. And I go to the local co-op and I like to be able to buy food. And I'm happy to buy some of it from California, right? But I want to know that I'm getting what I want to get and I'm willing to pay for it. I'm willing to pay much more for a dozen eggs than they cost at Walmart, much more. Um, I, so for me, that's who I am. I'm willing to do that. That's what I want to eat. I have a friend who said, you know, he used to be what he called a value shopper, and he just looked for the best deal, meaning the lowest price. And he said now, after he's talked to me for enough time, he now really looks for high quality, real organic eggs. He said, I'm his egg rabbi. And he's learned that there actually are no deals there. If you pay less, you get less. And if you just want to buy calories, you know, you might as well go to McDonald's. They got cheap calories. But if you want to buy nutrition, if you want to buy food that will make you healthy, you're going to have to pay a bit more for that.
Yeah, and also regarding the price, I think that's one of the obstacles of getting a person to transition from factory farm food to organic. But what I found was I actually went to Sprouts Farmers Market, which is kind of like a little bit of an upscale like grocery store in my area. And they sell factory farm food, but they have like an abundance of organic food that's produced like in other countries and locally as well. And what I did was I kind of like standardized a 2,000 calorie count with the same micro or macronutrients. And basically what I found was for like a 2,000 calorie diet that's factory farmed, it would cost about like $7.70 a day for food. And then for a 2,000 calorie, that's super 2,000 calorie diet that's supermarket level organic, it ended up costing like $12.20 per day, or roughly like somewhere around there. So it was like roughly a $5 difference. But what I also found was that people that tend to shop organic also tend to eat out way less. So
Yeah.
in reality, indirectly, the people that actually buy the factory farm food end up spending far more money on food because they tend to, from my observation, eat out a lot more as well. And like one
Yeah.
fast food meal is like $10.
Right.
So that already
Right.
puts you well over the $12.20 that you would pay for all organic supermarket level food.
Right. Right.
So that I
It's
think the end variable is that most people just aren't uh, just health and wellness isn't a priority in their life until it gets like really really bad, until they get into
yes.
their 40s and 50s, and like a lot accumulation of bad lifestyle habits start to really add up. Then it kind of becomes more of a priority. But then there's that 30-40 years of damage and buying into the factory farm system with your dollars that help the system keep running.
Right. Right. This is, I think, a very rich conversation that we as a society and as the tribes in the society really need to engage. One of the things that the hydro lobby came up with, the slogan was making organic affordable for everyone. And and that implies that real organic is just a privilege for effete yuppies and Perrier drinking snobs. And I find it highly offensive, and untrue. But it's a way of playing people against each other. I think that real food, however you want to label it, real food with you know nutritional density and diversity, should be the food that everybody gets to eat. How we deal with poverty and people who cannot afford real food is a serious social issue, but it shouldn't be put on the backs of farmers saying we'll grow crappy food cheaper. And the end result of their logic train is that everyone's eating inferior food. And I will say I have a friend who is very involved with the green markets in New York City, and he said, it's interesting because they get a lot of support from people of means to help those farmers markets exist. And he said he knows a number of people who are very successful investment bankers. They actually don't have the time to go to the farmers market, but they have a very expensive person that goes and shops for them. And they wouldn't think of going to Walmart to get their food. They were going to get good food, and they can afford it. But we want we want everyone to be able to afford that food. We want a food system. In Denmark, they've made a recent decision to significantly support on a national level organic farming. And that's not just for the health consequences of the individuals who eat it, it's also for the social impact of that kind of farming. The positive effects for the climate, which we haven't even gotten into, but they're massive, perhaps our only lifeboat out of the situation that we're in. And um, you know, uh, there's so many positive consequences of a saner farming system, and they have committed, I don't know, $150 million or something to try and get their a percentage of organic up to 20 to 30% of the food produced in the country in a 5 to 10 year period. It's a noble effort, but they're doing that for the benefit of everybody, whether or not you choose to eat the organic food. So the whole issue, it's a touchy thing to talk about. Well, food should be more expensive. It is. And um, it immediately provokes this sort of, well, it must be nice to be you, because if you can afford to pay more for food, nobody seems to have trouble with paying for their internet connection or their new smartphone or their sneakers, their Nikes or whatever. There are a million places that we choose to spend money because we think it's important to us. And for some reason, good food has somehow been relegated to it should be cheap. And things that are good often aren't cheap. It's just that it costs more to produce, and it's worth more. It's valuable. If you could take a single pill and say, if you take this pill, you get all the benefits of a great diet every day, and the pill costs $5 a day. Would everybody take it? Yes. They would. They'd say, okay, good. I want to be healthy. Here's my $5. It's I don't know if it's cheaper than a pack of cigarettes because I haven't bought one in 50 years, but it's not that expensive for health. It's just that we often don't interpret our food choices as being about health.
Yeah, and I feel it goes back to, I mean, it's a deeper issue, but goes back to like core priorities. Like just like mental and physical health isn't a core priority these days, at least in America, I feel.
Right.
Like it's probably like, I mean, people say it's important, but then their actions kind of speak way differently. Like I get a lot of clients that come in, especially from the kind of science fields like computer science or engineering, and they'll be like, oh, like I want to be healthy, but I just want to like completely not think about this nutrition thing. I need something to like it being outsourced, like I need someone to cook the meals or something of this sort, and just kind of like indicates the person doesn't want to. It's just not a huge core priority and doesn't want to invest the time into it. And then there's also a deeper issue that people are working a lot more hours these days and don't realistically have the time to do that, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of variables going around at the same time.
Absolutely. Michael Pollan's book called Cooked is a very interesting exploration of developing a different relationship to preparing food and seeing it as a really interesting, noble, entertaining thing that will produce a delicious outcome. And it's a nice celebration of food where it's often relegated to being fast food. And, you know, what I said about if you could take a pill that would give the benefits of a healthy diet, everybody would take that pill. Obviously, the same is true for exercise. And I know that, you're very involved in helping people to move in their body. And same thing, we know there's so many health benefits, both mental and, for the body, physical. And if you could put that in a pill, everybody would buy that pill. It would be on the front page of the New York Times tomorrow.
And also, what do you feel like the one big stumbling block that's holding back like small farmers from going mainstream is the industry in general, in my opinion, hasn't figured out a way to make food as convenient as the factory farmed or conventionally farmed system. Like, like I feel a lot of times like like small organic farmers, they say they're like smarter farmers or better farmers, which I think is really the case. But like the kind of conventionally farmed or factory farm system kind of went the extra mile to also make it like extremely convenient for the consumer. And I feel like if the small farmers kind of like figured out a way to make it convenient for the consumer instead of just being available at the farmer's market like Saturday and Sunday for like 5 hours, for instance, but just kind of, I don't know the solution, but just figured out a way to make it a lot more convenient. I feel it would be easier to go mainstream because it would just be more accessible and kind of more on demand, which is kind of what the customer demands these days. Especially I feel with like Amazon with their Prime deal, 2-day shipping, is just going to become like more expected to have things on demand and being able to be very accessible and kind of just very convenient in general.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that, our world is experiencing such a rapid rate of change that we're all dizzy trying to keep up with it. Food system, how we get our food, how we prepare it is changing so quickly. I think, one thing you talk about small farmers is there's a prodigiously complex skill set in order to run these small businesses. And one of the skills that is sometimes not as developed, and certainly not as developed as our brothers and sisters who work in corporations, is business skills and how to make money at this. What are the ways in which we can do something more efficiently or market it differently? And it's hard to do as an independent unit. What we see is that when we start producing food on a corporate level, some very valuable things tend to get lost. They really do. And, you know, there's a difference between working as an anonymous employee in a large factory farm from being the person who goes out and has tended this field all your life, and perhaps all your parents' life, and perhaps all your grandparents' lives. So uh, it's a different relationship, but that's a place in which if we, the eaters, want to have that food available, and by God, we ought to want to. I mean, it's to my benefit as an eater to be able to get a delicious, nutritious blueberry instead of a factory farm thing that really doesn't taste like much. It looks the same. Then we all together have to figure out how to do this. We have a symposium. We had a symposium at Dartmouth College last year, the Real Organic Project Symposium. So interesting. And we had people from all over the country come in and speak for one day. A lot of them were farmers, but we had people from the supermarket industry, and we had a couple scientists, and we had some politicians. Very interesting. And you know, um, trying to explore how to make this work financially. It's not a simple and easy answer. And so it's something that we have to do together. What I was thinking of in that thing was that a blueberry grower showed up, and he basically was facing bankruptcy because he's being pushed out by the large hydroponic producers, and he didn't know what to do. And everybody from all over the country was at this symposium, and they wanted to buy his blueberries. Is exactly what they want to buy. And many of them tried to get them in their local stores, and by and large, they were unable to, because the food system did not smile upon the effort. He wasn't tiny. He was 20 acres of blueberries. So he was big enough that he needed to wholesale. And, these are complicated, interwoven problems, but there are no simple answers. We need to work together.
Gotcha. And then the last question I have before we close out is in regards to kind of animal husbandry practices in factory farms. Do you feel like even if I have like a highly confined operation, but I feed the animals like a species specific diet, do you feel like the nutritional profile of that meat will still be kind of like sustained? Like for instance, going back to the eggs conversation. Let's say chickens are omnivores, and let's say I'm running like a cage-free operation, which basically is like a warehouse with like 30,000 chickens enclosed and never allowed outdoors. But I fed these chickens kind of omnivore diet. So I gave them worms. I might supplement with corn and soy, like organic corn and soy, but I also give them an abundance of like worms, grass, other vegetations, other insects. Do you feel that that will balance out the nutritional profile of the food group? Because I feel the one thing that hurts the nutritional profile quite a bit, especially at factory farm meat, is the fact that they just predominantly feed these animals grains, which goes
Yeah.
against their like species specific diet, and then obviously hinders the micronutrient profile of the food group quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think I've ever seen an example of a farm that was able to recreate uh, being outdoors, indoors, even in diet, let alone in lifestyle. And we have to wonder what's the effect on an animal of being depressed for its entire life. Um, if you imagine yourself living in a chicken barn for 30 years, or whatever, do it for 6 weeks, you're going to be pretty miserable. And I think animals get miserable too. So uh, I think it's important that animals go outside to get their food. The famous saying is, Wendell Berry said that confinement operations have taken a brilliant solution and turned it into two serious problems. And instead of animals going out and eating grass, or in the case of chickens, also eating bugs and rolling around in the dirt and pooping all over the place, and that manure being taken back up by the plants in a really, at a density of manuring that is helpful, which means you need enough space for the animals to go on. And there's lots of ways of managing this that are uh, better than others. So they like to keep them fairly as a flock or as a herd of cows, and then move that herd every day and put them on fresh grass. That's a system, as Francis Ticky says, uh, cows like to walk around and grass likes to stay in the same place. So a traditional dairy is a really brilliant solution. And CAFOs do the opposite, and they keep the cows in one place and they bring the grass to them. And it's madness. And they're just a host of problems with it. So I don't think that we're going to outsmart it. And I don't think that there'll be an economic incentive. I think the incentive is to do it as cheap as possible. And grain is the cheapest way possible. Grain's often sold under the cost of production thanks to price supports. So it really makes sense. And of course, now with organic grain, we've got a serious amount of fraudulent imports. So that makes it cheaper. It just doesn't make it organic. So all of this conspires to no, I don't think for me, that would not be the solution. Let me say one thing before we go, Eugene, which is that I encourage people who are hearing this to go to our website, realorganicproject.org, and check us out. We have wonderful videos of farmers, part of our Know Your Farmer series, and you can get to really see the farms and hear these quite eloquent farmers talk about what they do and why they do it. And there's lots of other interesting stuff. You can see the 45 some people who serve on our boards who basically represent some of the very best of the organic pioneers in America. So we're working hard at this. We want everyone to help support us, and we can do it together.
Yeah, and I also have like a few resources for people that want to make finding local farms very easy. They can go to, also if you have other websites, that would be great to hear, but like eatwild.com. Also like Cornucopia, I think is a great resource as well. I don't know if you have any other resources for the listeners.
Sure. Organic Consumers Association has great stuff about our food system. Cornucopia has an excellent report on hydroponic production, and they really actually rank some of the biggest national producers. So you can see, is this company hydroponic? It's a fairly accurate thing, although it's a constantly changing scorecard out there, but that is a chance for people to be a little better informed. They also have very good scorecards about CAFO dairies. I think they have about chickens and eggs too. So for people trying to figure out what they're buying, that's the best resource I know.
Cool. All right, Dave. Well, thanks for being a guest on the show. It was great to chat with you finally.
Great, Eugene. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. Bye-bye.